Hey there. If you've ever studied literature, history, or international relations, you've inevitably bumped into a concept that literally shifted how we view the modern world. Today, we're diving into a masterclass study guide breaking down Edward Said's foundational 1978 text, Orientalism. Consider this your beginner's roadmap to one of the most influential academic books of the 20th century. Okay, let's dive right into this. Is the East actually a real, physical place with a unified culture, or is it an invention of the West? I know, it sounds like a trick question, but it challenges our assumed neutrality about global geography. Sayed's entire book is built on the premise that the Orient isn't a geographical fact, but rather a carefully constructed idea. Here is our roadmap for today's study guide. We'll be covering 6 core concepts: defining Orientalism, the West-Orient binary, discourse and hegemony, latent versus manifest Orientalism, contrapuntal reading, and the postcolonial legacy. Section 1. Defining Orientalism. The 3 pillars. To really grasp this, we've got to look at the author, Edward Said. He was a Palestinian-American academic and literary critic who absolutely revolutionized cultural studies back in 1978. Now, what's super interesting about this foundational text is how, right on page 2, Said explicitly lays out his thesis. He argues that Orientalism isn't just one single thing. Rather, it operates through 3 distinct but totally interdependent definitions. First up, Orientalism is an academic discipline. Basically, anyone who teaches, researches, or writes about the Orient is participating in it. Second, it's a style of thought, a whole worldview based on a strict, completely fabricated distinction between the East and the West. And third, and maybe most importantly, it functions as a corporate institution. What that means is it's a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and exercising political authority over the Orient. So you've got philosophy, academia, and political power all working together as one big machine. Section 2, challenging the West-Orient binary. This essentialist binary? It is the absolute heart of the problem. European Orientalists defined the West as rational, developed, humane, and dynamic. And, how convenient, they defined the Orient as the exact opposite: aberrant, undeveloped, primitive, and passive. By creating this negative mirror image, the West wasn't actually describing the East at all. It was really just flattering itself to claim superiority. It's kind of like a rigged game where the West always wins. Section 3. Discourse and political hegemony. So you might be wondering, how on earth did this fabricated binary become accepted as absolute truth? Well, Said drew heavily on the French philosopher Michel Foucault's theory of discourse. A discourse is essentially a rigid system of knowledge and power that sets the rules for what can even be thought or said about a topic. Western writers couldn't just invent anything. To be taken seriously, they had to conform to this Orientalist rulebook, and that created a self-perpetuating cycle that totally stripped the Orient of its ability to define itself. And here's the kicker. This academic knowledge was deeply tied to political hegemony, the dominance of one group over another. Said argued you simply cannot separate the academic knowledge produced about the Orient from the brute political power of European imperialism. This nexus of knowledge and power systematically stereotyped Eastern societies just to justify imperial resource extraction and colonial rule. This wasn't just abstract academia, it was the actual geopolitical architecture for ruling empires. Let's anchor this with a concrete example from the text. On page 39, Said analyzes the writings of Lord Cromer, who was a British colonial administrator in Egypt. Cromer relies entirely on stereotypes, describing Orientals as lethargic and fundamentally opposite to the logical European. He then takes this fabricated knowledge and uses it to justify why the British are morally obligated to rule over these quote-unquote subject races. The academic stereotype literally becomes the political policy. Section 4. Latent versus manifest Orientalism. So how does this break down in practice? Well, Said distinguishes between underlying beliefs and active policies. Latent Orientalism refers to the unconscious, unchanging certainty about what the Orient is, those deep-seated dreams, fantasies, and prejudices of an exotic, despotic, and backward East. It's constant, it's always humming in the background. Manifest Orientalism, on the other hand, consists of the stated views, active policies, formal knowledge production, and actual historical events. Basically, manifest Orientalism is what happens when those latent prejudices are put into action. To make this stick, let's look at the historical record. A perfect example of latent Orientalism is found in literature, like Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater, which endlessly fantasizes about the strange, unchanging nature of the Orient. For manifest Orientalism, just look at the history books. Napoleon's military invasion of Egypt in 1798, James Mill writing The History of British India, or Thomas Babington Macaulay's highly prejudiced policies on colonial education in India. Those latent fantasies directly drive the manifest imperial actions. Section 5. Contrapuntal reading, a new method. Now, ask yourself this. When you read a classic novel written during the height of the British or French empires, how should you read it? Do you just passively accept the dominant narrative, or do you look for what's missing? Sayad, who was actually a really accomplished pianist, derived a brilliant method from classical music. In music, counterpoint is the relationship between voices that are harmonically independent, but independent in rhythm. Applied to literature, contrapuntal reading involves reading a text simultaneously from the perspective of the dominant empire and the marginalized colonized subjects. It allows you to uncover hidden imperial elements and hear those suppressed counter-narratives bubbling just beneath the surface of the main story. Section 6. The Postcolonial Legacy. Orientalism's Impact. Let's move to the legacy and see how this all builds. Orientalism didn't just sit on a library shelf gathering dust. It launched an entirely new academic movement. After it was published in 1978, the field of postcolonial theory absolutely exploded. By the 1990s, scholars like Homi Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak expanded on Said's work, forming what some call the Holy Trinity of postcolonial studies. The framework even spread geographically. In 1992, Milica Bukic-Hayden developed the concept of nesting Orientalisms to analyze how these exact same dynamics of othering apply within Eastern Europe and the Balkans. Because as Said himself warned, Orientalism lives on academically through its doctrines and theses about the Orient and the Oriental. He's reminding us here that the systemic othering he described isn't just ancient history, relegated to the 19th century. It's a deeply ingrained framework that continues to influence how the West views, studies, and interacts with the East today. All right, to pull this all together, remember these 3 core takeaways. Number 1, knowledge is inextricably tied to political power. Number 2, the West fabricated the concept of the Orient as its inferior opposite to justify imperial conquest and resource extraction. And number 3, Orientalism functions as a rigid discourse that limits genuine, objective cultural understanding. So, I want to leave you with a question. Take a look at the news, watch a major blockbuster, or read a foreign policy brief. Where do you still see these latent Orientalist stereotypes shaping our manifest geopolitical policies and media today? Edward Said gave us the tools to see these invisible structures of power. The question is, now that you can see them, how will you read the world differently?